Okay, that's better with the mic closer. Okay, it's
Yep.
supposed to be a good mic. It looks very, very professional. Dangerous, I'll bang into it, but okay, that's better with the mic closer.
So, yeah,
okay.
So we're transmitting via YouTube too, so there will be some friends.
So
making
do
the-
I go? I put it on English or I put it on off?
You know what? You can turn it off actually. Let's do something because I'm going to start in Spanish. Maybe
Yes.
in that moment, you go to Spanish, Bob, and
Okay.
you can
Okay.
translate into English, Paulina.
Okay.
Okay. So so at the beginning, go to the English channel, and I will start
Okay.
in Spanish to welcome people,
Okay.
and then you turn off translation. All right,
Okay.
Bob?
Yeah, sure. If we had like Russian and German going on, that would be on this interpretation, right? You can,
Exactly.
if possible, to expand like that, right?
Yeah,
That's
you
great.
can have several channels. We have some
Terrific.
people from
no,
India connected
I
today
don't hear
too.
anything now.
Yeah.
Oh, I hear Paulina. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. So, bueno,
Okay.
bienvenidos, bienvenidas a
Okay.
todos. Bienvenido, Bob, a este espacio de encuentro y bienvenidos a todos los amigos que están aquí, a las ciento y tantas personas que han llegado hoy a este nuevo diálogo en reimaginar lo humano. Este es nuestro 7º encuentro. Y hoy tengo el tremendo placer de tener conmigo a uno de mis héroes intelectuales y espirituales, Bob Thurman, que es un gran representante del budismo indo-tibetano en Occidente. Bob fue profesor de la Universidad de Columbia, fue el chair del Jet Tsongkhapa, posición en la Universidad de Columbia enseñando budismo indo-tibetano por muchos años y recién se retiró el año pasado, el año 2019. Fue quien fundó Tibet House en Nueva York también y dirige un centro de retiros, Menla, un lugar maravilloso que espero conocer algún día y algunos de ustedes también. Y en fin, además de todo su impresionante currículum como traductor, como escritor, como profesor en varias universidades particulares de Columbia, lo que quiero decir de Bob es que es un ser humano con una gran pasión por el Dharma, gran pasión por el Buda. Su esposa dice que él es un budajólico, en vez de ser un trabajólico, es un budajólico. Y bueno, tenemos una gran suerte
That's what my wife calls me.
Yeah. Tenemos una gran suerte de contar con él. Así que vamos a hacer una pequeña práctica de meditación, como siempre, para llegar unos 2 o 3 minutos y luego vamos a comenzar el diálogo con Bob Thurman. Así que les invito a tomar una postura cómoda y estable. Les invito a sentir el cuerpo bien asentado en vuestra silla, en vuestro cojín, en el suelo. Y tomamos unas 4 o 5 respiraciones de limpieza, inhalando por la nariz, exhalando por la boca. Inhalando profundo por la nariz, llenando todo el torso de aire. Y soltando completamente. Y un par de veces más a tu ritmo, soltando todas las tensiones, preocupaciones. Y conectando con el momento presente, con la comunidad de amigos, con la presencia de este gran amigo y maestro. Y simplemente sentimos por unos instantes el aire fluir hacia adentro y hacia afuera del cuerpo. Si está disponible para ti, puedes añadir una muy leve sonrisa en el rostro que ayuda a relajar el cuerpo y la mente. Y finalmente os invito a conectar con vuestra motivación para estar aquí. ¿Qué es lo que te trae aquí hoy a este diálogo con Bob? Quizás sea búsqueda de conocimiento, conectar con una comunidad de gente que resuena en tus valores, abrir la mente y la imaginación. Y cualquiera sea tu motivación para estar aquí, nota cómo se conecta con una aspiración, un deseo universal de cultivar la felicidad en uno mismo y en los demás, y en aliviar el sufrimiento en uno mismo y en los demás. Y generamos la aspiración de que este encuentro traiga beneficio no solamente a todas las personas que están aquí conectadas y quienes están viendo esto en diferido vía YouTube después, sino que traiga beneficio a todos los seres en todas partes. Muy bien, muchas gracias. Y ahora voy a cambiar al inglés, voy a empezar a hablar en inglés con Bob. Así que quienes necesiten traducción pueden ir al botón de interpretación y elegir el canal español, y ahí va a estar Paulina traduciendo. All right, Bob, welcome to this space.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I'm so relaxed now, though I might take a nap.
It would be an interesting starting for a conversation, a brief nap.
I know. I'll try to stay awake. I'll try to wake up. Just kidding.
So I'm really delighted to have you here. As I told you in the emails and the conversation that we had, this is a space to rethink humanity, to use our imagination, to recreate the way we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the planet. And I think this could be a good timing. Like as you know, Mother Earth sent us to our rooms to reflect for a little while because we've been messing around too much with the environment and with each other.
That's right.
So let me start with this question. So you come from the Indo-Tibetan tradition, that's your main source. And in that context, imagination and perception are very much linked. So what's the relationship between imagination and perception? And in which way we can use our imagination in these times of crisis?
Right. That's a good question. Although I was thinking from the list of questions you sent me that the one about why is it so great to be human might also be a good place to start. But let's start with this one.
As you like.
And the thing is that that was your last question, but in a way that's the first question on the Tibetan path, is the preciousness of the human embodiment endowed with liberty and opportunity. I will come back, but I will come back to that.
Okay.
So on this one, just to deal with this one, you know, way back in time of Dignaga, there was a wonderful Buddhist Indian philosopher named Dignaga, who is studied by all the Tibetans still today. But he was a mainstream person in epistemology, you know, knowing about how we know things. And in the around 5th century of the Common Era. And he was, no one could refute him. He was such a great, he was like Kant, actually, in Europe in the 18th century. Immanuel Kant, he preceded Kant's insight about the relationship of conceptuality to experience. And he showed beautifully how the ordinary experience we can properly call perception, which comes from Latin, percipio, to take something in your mind through something else, like looking through something. And what you're looking through is a concept. So when we see the screen in front of us, for example, or the floor or the table, our concept, floor, table, screen, just comes right out of the brain really quickly. And we think we sort of see it in the thing. So when we see the floor, we see the quote floor and we see non-quote floor at the same time.
Mhm.
We don't have any sensation of seeing floor before we know what it is, which we know only conceptually. We fit the floor into what we have the concept floor as a floor. So Dignaga beautifully figured this out. Like Kant did, Kant came to a different conclusion because he didn't have a community of people who were deep meditators, But they both figured out that the concept controls what we think we see.
Mhm.
And therefore, people who think they don't have a vivid imagination, they're not artists, they're not poets, and they think, oh, I don't really have a big imagination, I just, I go ahead, I go around this and that. That's because their imagination is routinized. It has a routine of being trapped in their network of concepts. And so they almost never see anything completely fresh, that they almost don't know what it is unless they're drunk or intoxicated in some way where the conceptuality thing doesn't work well, and then they might hallucinate or something with the attempt to sort of control what they're seeing. But the point is that actually when we first look down at the floor, there's a split second, if we are more self-aware about how our mind works, where we are out there on the floor. There's no barrier between we take the floor into our being. We're kind of like a cloud-like being that embraces everything we see. And the vision is very important because it can reach far away. You look at the sky, and for a moment you're lost in the sky. But when the way you protect yourself by habit is your brain says sky, and then okay, that's the sky, and then you stop looking at it. In a way, you think you've experienced it, and actually you've restored yourself as being back inside your own skin, and you've trapped your experience of vast openness, which is looking at sky. There's no limit to it. You trap that experience within your concept of I'm Bob looking at the sky. But what we don't realize is I'm imagining myself as Bob. I'm imagining that that's the sky. And the image of the sky, which is the concept for sky, fits with the concept, has trapped the actual open experience of the sky, if you follow me. So the Buddhist method of having us learn about what we actually are as beings is to develop an introspective awareness of how the mind works and begin to free our inner mental perceptual working from being completely encoded ahead of time in our network of concepts. So we can actually experience things afresh. Like when you look at something and you kind of don't know what it is, and so you investigate it, you see the dewdrop, like if you're a poet, Emily Dickinson, she sees the dewdrop on the flower petal, and then that makes her think of the lanterns on the streets of heaven, like something like that, because she doesn't immediately say, oh yeah, dewdrop on a flower petal, and then what's for breakfast? Do you know what I mean? She doesn't live only in her inner flow of concepts. Her perception breaks loose naturally because the human being naturally does that. That's why we have to be educated, and we have to have ingrained condition so that we only see what we are supposed to see by the network of our concepts. It's why the poet Shelley said, it's not especially Buddhist, in other words, although the Buddhists refined their awareness of this beyond what Western psychology or philosophy has done, which is why it's so useful to us. But Shelley said the poets are the unacknowledged legislators of mankind. And what he meant by that was that the poet breaks free of trapping the flower within their concept of a flower and a dewdrop. And they sort of see something completely different in it. And they completely do. But then when they describe it in a poem, this gives a new set of concepts to people through simile and metaphor and analogy. And then people start to see these other dimensions in things, which is why they value poets and they treasure them. But they thus legislate the terms of experience of people. Do you follow me?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, the reason I'm launching into this description, which is not specifically religiously Buddhist, it's epistemological, is that based on that, Dignaga, 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 he created a thing where what we've experienced directly without overlaying a concept, which actually takes a mental effort to learn how to do that, to open one's mind that way. And meditation can help with that if it's directed that way. And not any kind of meditation, but some kind of meditation can do that, analytic type of meditation. And then what you experience before you entrap it in a concept is actual reality. And in that reality, you are completely intertwined with everything around you and interconnected to it. And your sense of being a separate, fixed being that is holding the universe at bay, so to speak, or trying to dominate it or trying to escape from it. All of the things that then ensue from the false relationship of being a conceptually isolated and alienated from the universe. You break through that by beginning to be open to the universe, which is like you're surfing the universe, or like a surfer on a wave. You can't control that wave. Okay, I'm on a wave. I'm exactly 28 degrees above the crest, and then you would completely be trashed into the sand if you go around calculating like that. But you just go with the flow of it, and you can have a wonderful experience if you're a good surfer, which I always wanted to be, but I grew up in New York, so I'm not a Californian, So, but my point is that therefore everyone has a very powerful imagination because they imagine their way through the day. But the problem with where they think it is an imagination, because they think that the concepts they have for things are in the things themselves. And much of the naive, I would say, philosophy, like Plato, for example, he thought there was an absolute idea of a table in all tables. The form, what he called that's the word they use, form, the idon in the table. And so therefore, when you see the table as tables, because the idea pops out of the table. But that's silly, The point is you put that idea on top of the table. And that's why in ancient time, people would fight because they had different languages, like mesa. Is this a table or a mesa? Well, obviously, it's neither only a table or a mesa. A table, you can call whatever you want to call it if you have different languages, So the table itself is some inconceivability. And even you could say, well, for example, I'm sitting at a table that's made of oak, and it's sitting right here, and blah, blah. But actually, it's also made of atoms, we now know from the analytic science. And even the atoms are made of subatomic particles and quanta. But then what they're made of, we don't even know. Right. And we can't actually know. So in that way, our analytic materialist science has actually caught up with the openness of actual reality, which is experienceable, and we experience it all the time. But you can't actually capture it with your concept for it. That's the wonderful thing about it. And that's actually the meaning of the famous Buddhist concept of emptiness. It doesn't mean that things don't exist. It's not nothingness, not at all. It's not the nada. It's not existentialism. It is emptiness. Just means that the relational things, which are all the things we are intertwined with, including each other and all the objects around us as well, all of those things are empty of being fixed as whatever our concept for them is. So they're empty of what we call an intrinsic reality, a reality that is sort of fixated like the tablehood, the mesa, the mesa-ness, in the table is not there. It's empty of any tablehood. But that doesn't mean it's not there. What it means is it's only a relational thing. And in a way, ultimately, it's inconceivable by concepts. Okay?
So, yeah.
And why I'm getting into this, because I read your other questions and you were thinking about everyone is all scared of so-called Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
Because there's all this imagery and use of the imagination for visualization and et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But that is only for advanced level of practice. And because your imagination is not that much under your control until you have learned this relationship of immediate experience, which actually I call intuition. I don't call it perception, because perception, the per part, the Latin prefix per means through something. And kipioception comes from kipio, to take something. So to take an experience through a notion about the experience is what perception is, which Dignaga's Hindu opponents in philosophy in India in the 5th century, and Buddha's own opponents, they were always wanting to say that, no, the concept is really in the thing, and all we have is perception. We don't have a kind of raw, non-verbal experience of anything, So they completely mix language with reality. The regular Indians in Buddha's time, like the Western naive philosophers do also. But the self-aware ones who practice this kind of great meditative, analytic way of becoming introspective about how your mind actually works and your brain works, and how the concepts pop out and surround and actually smother your experience. It's like the person who goes to the museum and they see the crows in the south of France swirling around the haystack, and they kind of feel the hot sun of Provence, and the cawing of the crows, and the brilliant yellow colors, and they, for a moment, they'll sort of go through a window and they're in another world. And then bang, oh, Van Gogh, oh, I wonder if he was stoned on whatever ether or whatever the paint is made of, or if he was already crazy, or if it, how much it was bought by the museum, or how many millions it's worth. Or, in other words, you have no experience because your mind just goes on yak about the painting. But there's a split moment when you just look up and bam, you don't even know it's Van Gogh. You don't know it's really south of France. You're there with some crows. But to recover that freshness of experience takes serious effort.
Yeah.
Because we're so indoctrinated, by our cultures and by our habits of language and so forth. And this doesn't mean also that we can somehow lobotomize ourselves and we'd be all enlightened if we didn't have any language. It's not that easy. Because actually language itself is a direct experience object, and a very subtle, wonderful one, mantra. At its deepest level, it's mantra, it's poetry, but it's something open also. But the habitual language from the ordinary culture. So so-called Tibetan Buddhism is nothing but the preservation, the sacred, holy, careful, cherishing, loving preservation of what Buddhism, how Buddhism had flourished and blossomed and bloomed for 1,600 years in India by the 6th, 7th, 8th century and 10th, 11th century, during the 4 or 5 centuries when it's moved into Tibet, when the Tibetans came down into India. And it really preserves, and it brought India into this wonderful place, which is that magic that we feel about India, all of us. And then India was conquered, starting around 1100, 1000 of the Common Era, but first by Persians and Arabs and Tajiks and Turkish people from Central Asia and so forth, and then by Europeans. And so that whole beautiful, open, vulnerable, gentle, women worshiping, adoring culture, mother goddess adoring culture, was submerged again by a bunch of male chauvinist militarists. So, for 1,000 years, until just lately. and it's trying to break out again now. And then the Tibetans, of course, during the 1,000 years that they were the custodians, they did a lot of refinement, and they had so many geniuses and fantastic people because they gave up their military preoccupation that they'd had when it began, and they became more peaceful and wonderful, and now they're bringing it back kind of by accident to India and to the world, and we'll see what happens, So not to worry about, oh no, nobody expects that someone who kind of just gets off the street and starts looking into how their own mind works, nobody expects them right away to be able to visualize the perfect mandala and see everything as made of jewels and whatever. That's the poetic level that one can reach by first learning how to deconstruct the prison of like egocentric cultural concepts and alienated from reality, severed from being a full participant and fully connected to reality, which one does by beginning on the path. And the first place to begin is with the preciousness of the human life.
So let me interject right there for a moment, because you said so many things, interesting things. Just
well, you don't have to do whatever you like. You ask or say whatever you like, or question whatever you like.
I mean, the implications of what you were saying, that we like what we perceive is actually part of ourselves, that the sky that I see is part of my imagination, of the habits that I have of perception. So, so just if you can speak a little bit, what's the function of imagining in the Tibetan tradition, like imagining the mandalas or imagining oneself as a practitioner in the body of a Buddha? Sure. How that could be more realistic than seeing yourself as an ordinary being or just seeing Fifth Avenue in New York?
Well, okay, very short answer. When you realize that you are imagining yourself as however you habitually are, that's an act of imagination. That when you see things in a room, you're imagining every single thing, in the sense that you're imposing images on everything that you see. You're organizing the field of vision, or you're organizing the sounds that you hear. And then the different senses get closer and closer. Finally, touch. You're when you touch the table surface with your fingertips, you are separating yourself from the table, from the atoms of your fingertips and the subatomic particles, and then who knows what, the pure energy in yourself and in the table. There, you're completely severing that connection, and you're alienating yourself from the table, even though when you touch it, all kinds of transmissions occur, not just the coronavirus in case you're in a bad place, but whatever, the temperature, there's all kinds of things that are microscopically interactive between your fingertips and whatever you touch. But you don't think so, because you have a concept: my fingertips are not the table is not me. And that severs the contact. That's the essence of the alienation. So because we are imagining all the time, when we learn that and we begin to gradually and slowly and with effort and with analysis and with understanding and wisdom, we learn what we're doing, and we begin to master our imagination rather than just be imprisoned by it. Then we realize that we can imagine things differently. And then we begin to change. And we actually normally do that. That's the great thing about the human. The human is not relatively not hardwired like other lesser capable animals. In other words, the human can think, oh, wait, well, maybe I won't do it that way, or maybe I'll do this way, or some other thing. So the human can become what we would call demented, in that they would say, well, maybe I am the table. Or, I know a lady, an dear old friend of mine, who used to say that she became interested in Buddhism in a class in college in America, because when the professor was talking about sort of Buddhist theories of emptiness and interrelatedness, she suddenly felt that she was the chair she was sitting in, as well as the body she was in sitting in the chair. She felt she and the chair were one, just for a split second. But she noticed that just from hearing the word, that her sense of rigid sense of being her body and nothing else slipped just temporarily a little bit, and she suddenly felt she was the unit of herself plus chair, or chair plus herself. And this made her realize the arbitrariness of what she took for granted as the rigidly defined world. And this then made her interested in finding out more about how to work with that. So that is the reason. So then when you become more aware of what a valuable embodiment you have, you become aware that you will not keep that embodiment forever, that you will pass from it. Your consciousness will pass from your embodiment. You become aware of the interconnectedness to the degree that you realize you can't become nothing. Also, you never did not come from nothing. Everything is an endless continuum. Which is very obvious. Even it isn't even mystical. It's obvious. And no one can point to anything being nothing, because that's what nothing means. Because it's not there, so you can't be nothing, and you can't come from it because it's not a place that could be an origin. Because it's not there. So everything is a continuum in we've ever experienced. There's nothing that's not a continuum. So the default obvious position is we've come from a beginningless continuum. We will continue beginninglessly. So when you realize that, and you realize how important this current embodiment that we have, then you go to work and you discover you don't like being pushed around by your impulses. You don't like being pushed around by other people either, but you also don't like being pushed around by some inner, I've got to hate somebody, I've got to grab something, I have to do this, do that. So you begin to work on become more self-aware, which is not that difficult because you are this brilliant being, which is human. Then you realize, then you feel much better once you're more in control of yourself. And the minute you do, you realize how other people don't feel well, because they're pushed around by all these inner surges and impulses and reactions, and they're the victim of all kind of circumstances, and they feel they're helpless, and then you feel compassion for them, and then finally you decide, well, you're really going to know exactly what's real here. You want to be really realistic, what is real and what is unreal, and you put a lot of effort into that, and in the process of doing that, you become more free of your conditioning and you deconstruct your habitual imagination, and therefore you become more capable of imagining.
Right.
You begin to realize that you're dreaming yourself in the daytime, and then you become more lucidly awake even before you can be lucidly dreaming. And then the minute you do that, you realize, wow, well, I wouldn't even go from Buenos Aires to Mendoza if I wasn't imagining being in Mendoza first. So I have to imagine going on the highway, getting in a car, then I imagine a lot of different things that are not right in front of me in order to do that. And in that sense, I'm always imagining something. So then this is where visualization becomes important. Do you remember there was a high jumper in the Olympics about 20 years ago? You might be too young, a lot of you guys.
I remember who imagined the jump before.
Yeah, he used to stand there, and his head would go like this, and then he would go like that, and you would realize he was visualizing himself jumping over it without knocking the bar off. And somehow he felt this helped him mobilize all the muscles and nerves and energies and mind to lift himself that extra quarter of an inch or 16th of an inch to clear the bar, and he won a lot of medals. So he was visualizing for sure. So that means that actually, we don't think he was a Buddhist adept or anything, but he was realizing that we are visualizing. We're visualizing failure if we keep failing. And he was giving himself a little extra impulse by visualizing success. And so that's Tibetan. It's only that it wasn't just invented by Tibetans. The Indians did this when many more of them became self-aware and began to realize the power of the mind that is exercised through imagining. And then they wanted to, and because they learned to control their emotional reactions, they learned to control their addictive impulses, and they learned to they were more free in mind, therefore. And then they began to think about, well, let's imagine changing the whole world.
Right.
Let's imagine having a better one. Let's imagine everyone being loving. Let's imagine everyone being happy. And then what a Buddha is defined as, which is one of your questions, is a being who has become so completely happy themselves
Mm.
that they have only reason they remain present or return to be present even from being in a more vast and open embodiment is is to make others more happy, and their
Mm.
pleasure comes from seeing others relieved from their suffering. Just like, as you know, when you go to Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever the equivalent is in whatever family, when you go there, you get some presents and that's great, thanks a lot, and then you break it or it isn't exactly what you wanted. But when you see the little kid gets
Mm.
their toy truck or something and they go, and they're going crazy, that's the great pleasure of any such holiday.
Mm.
Is the other one enjoying because they're not yet learned to be so discontented. They haven't watched so many commercials, or they shouldn't have, because of course the marketers are after them already at the age of 3. They're already after them for candy and crap. But that's my point anyway. So that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you.
I know I
Mm.
talk too much. I'm so sorry, Paulina. I hope you're keeping up.
I hope she's alive. So, Bob, if I'm following you at the personal level, uh,
Yes,
reality and who I am, it's up for grabs. It's
yes,
undefined.
yes,
So I can use that ambiguity of reality, which we can call
yes,
emptiness, which is not that I'm nothing, but I'm not defined. I'm not reified.
yes.
So I can use my imagination to say, why not become a Buddha in this life for the benefit of
That's
people,
right.
right?
Sure, sure.
So, and in that sense, I understand this process of imagining the possibility of awakening for the benefit of others. And of
Right.
course, I'll be the most cheerful in the whole room if I dedicate my
Yeah,
mind
that's
to
that's
that
the key.
purpose, right?
Yeah, because then the Zen people will come along and say, well, you can't imagine being a Buddha because when you're a Buddha, you're not a Buddha.
Right,
And they're correct, actually. But what that means is that what a Buddha is a being that is so open.
right.
They are everything, actually. And so that's why emptiness or selflessness or uncreatedness or all these kind of negational terms. Even the word freedom is negation, libertad.
Mm,
Libertad is a negation. It means freedom from bondage.
mm,
It's negating the bondage, right? And so all of those terms are negative. And what they mean is that you experience everything as you, and therefore you don't tolerate misery in anywhere you see it. The reason you get your joy from another person being relieved from suffering is that if they're not relieved, you're feeling their suffering.
mhm,
And therefore it's spoiling your fun.
right.
And luckily, not completely, only insofar as they are it's spoiled for them, because you simultaneously have such a strong bliss and happiness that you are able to overwhelm their suffering. But on the other hand, you can't just blast them,
Yeah.
into it. You can try, you can be a rock star or something and get them to like relax and drop out for half an hour by the music. But but that won't ultimately do it. They have to have some inner change, so they have to learn something. They say the ultimate way of reaching out to the other is to let them have the teaching, a method of how to open themselves.
Right.
That's the ultimate way of spreading happiness,
So
giving others the means of gaining their own happiness.
that's
Because you
something that
can't you
really,
can't push them from outside. It's
something
like
that really,
go hug a paranoiac.
yeah.
Someone who's really paranoid, you rush up to hug them, and they'll perceive you as a big bear wanting to devour them, and they'll fight
Mhm.
you. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? So you don't want to do it that way.
So when I see the Dalai Lama, or you may have met Bishop Desmond Tutu too,
Yes,
what I see is these people have seen, have witnessed tremendous suffering, the most horrible things that we can do to each other as humans. They have witnessed that. They have
sure,
heard
sure.
the worst cries of the world, and yet, they they keep a cheer. They're joyful beings. So how do you explain that? When I saw the Dalai Lama the first time in Chile in 1999, it was his laughter like a young kid shining. And I said, how can someone that has seen such suffering remain so joyful? How do you explain that, Bob?
Well, it's kind of professional at a super deep level from the heart. And what I mean by that is that the super open sensitivity, like if you can imagine the concept of universal empathy,
Mm,
you feel so much suffering so vastly that, and it's so unbearable to you. But if you just sink into it,
mm,
then you haven't helped it at all.
mm,
So instead, you expand beyond that to the deepest level.
mm,
And here we get into the level of, maybe you could call ambiguity, the ambiguity of enlightenment, what I call the toleration of cognitive dissonance,
mm,
which is the real, I think, a better term for enlightenment than some idea of some simplistic state apart from everything. Most people tend, because the life is so difficult and stressful, most people think enlightenment is some like deep sleep where
right.
you escape from it all. But that is actually defining enlightenment as psychosis, as a state of complete isolation. And
Mm,
Buddha, right away, even in Theravada, basic, what we call individual vehicle, or dualistic Buddhism, it was nirvana somewhere else, and this is the horrible samsara. Even in that form that he taught some people as a beginning way of teaching them, even there, he immediately spoke about the four he called the formless realms
mm,
of states of seeming nothingness, states of beyond conscious, unconscious, states of infinite space and infinite consciousness, all kind of thing. And he said, those are not nirvana.
mm,
Those are attainable states by the human, powerful yogic mind,
mm,
but and divine mind actually as well. But they are not enlightenment. And although, and then people thought, well, wait, well, what else could nirvana be? So they were always puzzled. What was nirvana? They thought maybe it was something even more nothing than those sort of nothing states, seemingly nothing states. And he let them think that, because otherwise, if they couldn't think of an escape, their sensitivity was such they feel overwhelmed and depressed and crushed,
mm,
and too sad,
mm,
So the key though is that the reality that everything is made of, even the confused suffering. Remember, the source of the suffering is ignorance, was Buddha's insight, meaning that it's only horrible stuff going on because people don't know what's really going on.
mm,
If they knew what was really going on, they wouldn't be harming each other, they wouldn't be
mm,
harming themselves, they wouldn't be having a horrible time. They would have a kind of trust,
mm,
in Western psychology, as you know very well, because you know more than I do about Western psychology by far. And you know that, like, take Eric Erickson, his 7 stages of becoming a healthy person.
mm, mm.
Very first one is basic trust versus
Right.
basic distrust in the universe. And what Buddha discovered when he went through everything and down to the subatomic particles, he reached where the quantum physicists reached in 1926 in Copenhagen over a beer, good Danish beer. They realized that the mind was there amongst these micro objects, and that it was interfering with observing them, and it was part of the interconnectedness, and therefore couldn't really trap an object as separate from itself.
Mhm,
And he realized that. And then he realized that that plenum of pure energy was infinite potential, and it was infinitely available and
mhm,
accessible. And there was no shortage of fulfillment of any
mm,
kind of need or any kind of pain or any kind of wound. And that's why he smiled. And that's why he was so happy.
mm,
And so someone in front of you is dying in some horrible way, but you are seeing a level of the where the death is a release for them, from the horrible thing that's happening to the body. And of course, the mind is carrying the horror with it to some extent. And yet, it goes through a process of connecting to what we call the clear light of the void. Luz clara. Clara luz, I think, in Espanol, no? No se dice.
Luz clara,
Luz
sí.
clara. But the emphasis there is on the clara, not the luz.
Exacto, sí.
Because the luz is not the opposite of the darkness. The luz is a transparency,
Right.
where it's like a gray, loose, open, transparency, and you can see through everything. You can still see everything, but you see through it. So the point is, by seeing through that, and then not only that, but an enlightened being doesn't give up the person, mind and soul, the alma. And don't believe it when you say Buddhists don't believe in alma. They do have almas, first, definitely. Tenemos alma, like everybody else. But it's a relational
you have to explain
alma.
That, Bob, because many people think that Buddhism says that you don't have a soul.
I know, because the first Europeans to encounter Buddhist science, they saw expressions like no alma, and they didn't notice that in the same voice of no alma, there's no nose, there's no ear, there's no face, there's no ground, no earth, no water, no fire, no wind, no space. So in the no thing, everything is no. There's also no nothing. So the no business, then, because they were trying to escape from the church and the dogma and the fear that some strange patriarchal God was going to send them to hell for just being human. They were so scared of that they thought, oh, great, here's a religion and I don't have to have a soul, so I don't have to fear hell. Then when they studied a little more, they thought, oh no, Buddhism has a hell too. How do you go there? Oh no, terrible. But at least they never say it's permanent. They don't say eternal. They don't say permanent. That's too sadistic. They never say that. But you can make it really bad. You can you can kill 1 million people, and you can suffer the response of that bad vibration 1 million times, which is like a hell. I mean, we don't have to go that far. Syria is hell right now. Syria is total hell. That poor man, who's like, in order to keep his power, and I own Syria, he's like made hell for himself and everybody else. He looks like he's fancy, wearing a nice suit with a necktie and everything. But that's just inside, he's all torn up, that guy. Because so many people hate him. He's killed so many people. And Putin, oh my God. Having 200 billion doesn't help, from bombing hospitals and babies and guys with white helmets. That doesn't help. And you do it when you do it. You know it. They know it. Yeah. They may deny it, drink more vodka, forget about it, distract themselves, but they know. What everyone knows everything, actually. We all know everything. In that sense, we're already Buddhas because we know everything. But we can shut it off. We use our imagination, our routinized imagination, to turn off what we really feel, to turn off our real sensitivity.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's the greatness of us as humans. We're so sensitive. It's unbearable to be human, actually, really, because we're so sensitive. Like, okay, I have a fingernail that's like a little bit of a protection of the flesh under my fingernail, unless it gets ripped off or something. So that's nice. But I don't have any hard shell over the tip of my fingertip. And if I put it a little hot, too sharp, too cold, it's just so sensitive. But with that sensitivity, I can feel a caress, I can feel something exquisitely smooth. I can feel a blissful touch, but the danger of pain is there as well, So the point is, we have embodied ourselves very close to being able to feel everything, which is what we will do when we're Buddha. And luckily, here's the thing, Buddha, when he was under that tree, everybody knows, he could have said, or we might have never known what he said, because he would have said, oh, that's what it all is. Oh, no, how horrible. Oh, better not to know. Oh no, why do I? Oh, I'm so sorry now that I know what's real, really real. Oh, it's so terrible. I wouldn't even begin to tell somebody else. Much better they live in their illusion. But he didn't say that. He said, wow, this is like life is like an elixir of immortality. It
Mm,
is so profound, peaceful, luminous, transparent, clara luz, uncreated. It's always been like this. It always will be like this. It's secure as possible. And it is not, it is without any kind of weird proliferation.
mm.
It's fabulous. He was really happy. He levitated. He was so happy. And but he simultaneously knew everybody else what they were feeling. Oh no, okay, so they don't know this. So let me. But I was the ignorant prince. I didn't know. I ran away and I did this. I did that. But now I know, and that means if I can know, they can know.
Mm,
I was a spoiled brat prince by my father insisting that I become a conquering king, and I didn't. I at least had the sensitivity not to do that. But now I really know, and it's the reality is really great, and people will be so better off when they know their reality because reality is good. That's the great thing. People so mistakenly think worldwide, and that's why I'm so desperate to reach all the wonderful Latin people. Which I lived in Mexico Mexico in when I was 17, 18, and I had so much fun, and I loved the Mexican. And then I went to Buenos Aires when I was 24 as a monk, and then in 1965. But then I never could go back because I was just working all the time. Been in Spain a few times, but I was poor professor, salary man, no money to go anywhere unless I have a job or something invited by someone. So because everyone is terrorized by their governments and by their religions, including distorted forms of Buddhism,
mm,
that life is suffering,
mm,
that it's miserable. You should expect to be, and that wisdom is to be resigned to being miserable. And
mm.
that is precisely the revolution that the Buddha started
Yeah.
in India, because life life is not supposed to be miserable.
Mm,
And the gods, Buddha never denied the existence of powerful gods, by the way. He only questioned them. Actually, they informed him that they weren't omnipotent, that's all.
mm,
Brahma, the ones who the Indian people in Buddha's time thought was the creator, he said to Buddha, he said, I don't mind being worshipped by people when things are going well for them. That's really great. I like that. Oh yeah, they can say, God, we thank you, God, great. I don't mind that. He says, but when the things are horrible for them, when their children die, when they get tortured, when they're sick, when they're painful,
mm.
when the horrible happen, bomb gets dropped on them, I hate it when they think I caused it because I'm omnipotent and I could have
Right.
prevented it. I don't like that. So I want you, Buddha, to get enlightened.
Mm,
Now that you got enlightened, I love that you did, and I thank you for teaching me a few things. A and B, I want you to tell people that
mm,
when horrible things happen to them,
mm,
I didn't do it. I try to do the best I can, and I am very powerful, and I help as much as I can, but I can't prevent every kind of problem. We're all in it together. They and I are the human beings and all the animals, and we the gods, and me the biggest one at the moment, but there are plenty of them. And we are co-creating the world, all of us
mm,
together. And so we need to learn what it is to do a
mm,
good job. And everyone needs to learn, to avoid this any kind of horrible thing.
mm,
So that's what God said to Buddha.
mm,
And that's why God allowed and helped Buddha. He gave Buddha what they call the wheel of Dharma. He gave him the oomph to be able to survive. Because believe me, there were some high priests in ancient India, some high Brahmins on top the caste system. And there were some vicious kings, conquering kings who had militaries and things. And they didn't like somebody telling everybody, drop out, just have breakfast, have brunch, only one meal a day. Don't have kids unless you're really fully loving. just become enlightened, and then you'll be so happy you can help others be happy, and we'll have a happy society.
Mm.
They didn't like that. They say, no, you can't be happy. You have to work for me. I'm the king.
Mm.
Or you have to work for me. I'm the high priest. That's what cultures tell people. And they threaten them. If you don't work for me, you're going to hell.
Mhm.
Or you're going to my jail. The king will say. The high priest will say, you're going to God's jail. And so the early, coming back to where I launched into this, the early translators from the West, like the people in the Western Enlightenment, and believe me, I believe it was an enlightenment. I'm all for materialism in the sense that it gave them an excuse, a reason, a sense of courage to escape from the fate of Giordano Bruno or Galileo or the many people that the stupid Inquisition, the stupid Inquisidora, whatever you call it, killed so many people, horrible torturing and killing, and women killing so many women, like brujas, saying they were brujas, and horrible stuff. So by being materialists, they escaped from that, and they discovered more about the nature of material reality, and they finally, by 1926, they realized, as a whole, although a lot of them in denial of it still, for 100 years they've been in denial, but they still realized that they have a mind, and even they have a soul. The alma, hay cerebro, hay mente, non solamente cerebro, pero mente. Hay mente y hay alma. He reconocido esto. Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Einstein. No, God is in charge. He didn't want to, because for him, God meant his set of concepts. His notion, his conditioning, his culture that God was all powerful, and therefore he still thought his mind could be all powerful with its mathematics, which it's not. And we now realize that scientists are definitely not all powerful, right? Even Buddha, it's very clear, I'm not all powerful. I know I am aware of everything. I know what's going on, and I'm very competent to help, but I'm not omnipotent. I didn't create the situation. Actually, there's two answers to that. We all create it together all the time out of ignorance as one, and the other one, it never was created. The real reality is uncreated. It's always been that way. Freedom, joy, bliss. It's wonderful. Clara luz. And when we know that, when we have wisdom as the antidote to the ignorance, when we open completely, then we don't fear death. We don't fear pain. We should still worry about pain, but ultimately we can go beyond that. So that's the thing.
Bob, I'm aware of the time. Can we stay for 10 more minutes? Is that fine with you?
10? How about an hour?
All right.
Until we're exhausted.
Okay, let's go for it then. All right. So, Bob,
if you have, you can divide it in two if it's too much for people.
Well, let's see.
You're recording
what Paulina says. That people are saying she's doing a terrific job, a fantastic job, but I don't know how tired she is. So, Paulina, let me know maybe with a chat.
Paulina, if you get too exhausted, you let us know. Of course, I'll stop.
You can appear on screen if you want.
My better half, my mejor mitad, my esposa nena, que se llama la nena, que nació en México, pero es una sueca de Sweden, but she's not here. She's the one who tells me to shut up most effectively. So otherwise, of course, I love this topic.
I'm going to ask Paulina in my phone if she's okay, if we can carry on. Let's see what she says.
In future, Gonzalo.
Yes.
While you're waiting for the answer, in future, when we try to do stuff in the Latin world, which I'm hoping to do with you, lots of stuff, then we could have a team of translators. They can switch off,
Yeah,
you know.
let's do that.
And we have Sebastian Zugman, my friend, also from
Fantastic.
Buenos Aires, but although he's in New York right now, but his family is there, and he's a real Buenos Aires person. He's a really excellent translator, and he likes to help. You know, if he's busy, of course, but and then we should have a team helping Paulina
Nice. And
eventually if we do more. And I really want to do more. I feel so bad. In 1965, when I came back from Argentina as a monk, and then my teacher, my original Mongolian teacher, he said, in a way, the trip was not too fruitful because the Lama I was with, I didn't really know him. He didn't know me.
Mm.
He was embarrassed himself to be a monk. He was very nervous with people.
Mm.
I was a new monk. I was so excited to be there speaking Spanish and translating for him. But then we didn't really succeed in what our mission because of whatever. So then I didn't have a way of going back again for 50 years.
Wow.
And so I felt so sad because I could really feel the karma of the Latin people. When I was in high school, all I liked to do was speak Spanish. That's why I went to Mexico. I dropped out of school and went to Mexico. And actually, I tried to join Fidel Castro's revolution, but luckily they wouldn't accept me because I would be killed if they had. Or I might have chickened out once I really saw what was involved. But they just kicked me out. They laughed. They said, "Oh, here comes Don Quixote." I was so skinny and 17 years old, So I went to Mexico instead.
I think
Anyway,
you still have many years to contribute to the Latin world, and I'm going to squeeze you to get a lot of it. Paulina just said that we can carry on for a little while. So
okay, thank you, Paulina. Muchísimas gracias.
So I want to ask you something, a few more things. So one of them is how, because we've been more on the side of epistemology and spirituality in this first part of the conversation, I really want to tie in with the social and political issues. Some of my spiritual friends sometimes get a little bit angry at me when I mention politics or economy or animal welfare and so on. And something that I really like about you is that you're so involved, so passionate about climate change and politics. You're full on trying to get a Democrat being elected in November passionately.
Yes. Well, I would like Ocasio-Cortez to be president personally.
Yeah, me too.
Or she and Elizabeth Warren together, or she and I was desperate to have an intelligent presidential candidate, and Biden could do it, but he's being held back from it. What they should do is, and then one journalist, Friedman, he picked up on that idea. And I wanted to have the whole cabinet run for president. So instead of who's vice president, they all pick everybody.
Nice.
They have Elizabeth Warren as Secretary of Treasury, Kamala Harris, Secretary of Attorney General, the head legal person, Cory Booker maybe as Secretary of State, Julian Castro, Secretary of Homeland Security, whatever. They should change Homeland Security. That's a wrong department. Immigration, they should go back to having immigration, etc. So, in other words, I wanted them to run as a team,
right?
A dream team. And then he wrote a great editorial called "Team of Rivals." Apparently, Lincoln did that. Lincoln he sort of told everybody ahead of time who would his cabinet be, and he brought in rivals in the cabinet so that he could really get stuff done once he was in there. You know what I mean? It's useless to be president and vice president and then not be able to do what you want because the opposition is too strong. Anyway, never mind.
So,
but yes, so on the spiritual side, let me explain that. That. On the spiritual side, you see, this is another gift of the Tibetans, and and originally it's the enduring gift of the Indians, which was the country the Buddha chose to incarnate in. And because he was obviously a very high bodhisattva before Buddha. And he could pick where he was born. And why is this a gift? Most of the forms of Buddhism in the world are what I call countercultural Buddhism. And what I mean by countercultural, like Christianity is mostly countercultural too. meaning that it's a force that is there, and it's the main culture is the king and the army
Mm.
in all the cultures in the last few thousand years of
Yeah.
history, and very male dominated also, male chauvinist. So king and army are the big force. And then if there's a religion, a church or a temple or a synagogue or a mosque, and they have belief system and they have some kind of way of influencing people, they can sometimes get the king to kind of be nicer.
Mm.
Don't kill everybody.
Mm.
Don't go and exterminate the neighboring country. Just beat them up and then get a better trade deal or whatever. They can moderate the influence, but they don't have the responsibility of governing.
Mm.
And then sometimes they bless the king to go conquer shit, and then they really sold out, and then they just one entity like the Holy Roman Empire or something like that. Okay. So, however, in India, after 15 by actually after about 1,000 years, the force of the Buddhist education
Mm.
was so strong, and so many people were cheered up, and they had really beautiful Krishna dancing with Radha. Even when they weren't Buddhists, the Buddhists had all the loving bodhisattvas,
Mm.
Tara, Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri. They were so well educated, they could control themselves. They had the beautiful ragas, the music, they had wonderful sex, even. Kama
Mm.
Sutra was like super, and it's not just Playboy.
Mm.
Kama Sutra was also how to have a decent marriage.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? Because you tell your husband when they don't know what to do.
Mm.
And they act like that's all, just a little I'm happy and that's that. Then that's unhappy marriage. So Kama Sutra deals with such things, in fact, even how to have a party, even
Mm.
and not necessarily a sex party, just any kind of party. So the Kama Sutra is the science of pleasure. And the Indians open to all of that
Mm.
and very lesser militarism. And therefore they had all this great visualization, mandalas and yogas and things as
Right.
well, which is not just sex, by the way. It's internally dealing with your inner energies and way beyond trans and bi and q and but
Mm.
just internally in your own central channel, ultimately, really. Sometimes sex can be used, but it is not really just a big sex party. No way, that's a wrong understanding of what tantra is. But anyway, I'm saying they reached such a strong point that the kings were really sponsors of the universities, which were the big Buddhist monastic universities. And they basically had a very poor ability of making war. They
Mm.
had hardly any war between themselves. And therefore, when invading troops came from Portugal, from Europe, from France, from Holland, from England, and before that from Persia, from Arabia, from Tajikistan and Central Asia, then they were easy pushover
Mhm. Right.
because they lost that culture. But the Tibetans grabbed it. And actually, I think many of the great Indian adepts, siddhas, were reborn purposely in Tibet.
Mhm.
They chose to reborn in Tibet, the great Saraha,
Mm.
Nagarjuna, etc. And sometimes they identified themselves, sometimes not. But they were all born up there. And because nobody wanted to go conquer there because too high. They get altitude sickness when they try to
Right.
march up there. Until today,
Mm.
when the Chinese did it because they had airplanes and trucks and things, and they had modern machinery. But normally on horses, you're not going to go conquer Tibet. Nobody ever did,
Mm.
and they were always independent because and the good thing when they were before Buddhism, when they were militarists, the lucky thing for the people around them because they were so tough was that they didn't like living at lower altitude themselves, so they didn't colonize people. A little bit central, the Silk Route, a little bit for a little while, but otherwise they would just loot and pillage and rape and have a good time, a nasty time, be nasty, and come back to Tibet. And eventually their own kings became kind of bodhisattvas, and they realized that was a stupid way to behave. And you don't have fun internally when you're militarized externally.
Mm.
You develop a kind of fascist state internally, militarist state. And so they decided to be Buddhist, and then they kept this wonderful Indian gift. But the reason I'm launching into it, but therefore, since the kings listened to the adepts, and the adepts were more powerful than just a regular village priest, because they had almost magical abilities, healing powers and so on. Then they took an interest in governance and in ethics of governance, and they didn't act like we don't pay attention to governance. The countercultural, in other words, they became mainstream cultural, and this had a bad impact on India, on the many Indian nations at first, because it made them vulnerable to conquest. However, the ability to do that in a culture is now what is much needed on the whole planet. When it is impossible to conquer anybody. Colonialism collapsed last century, but still neo-colonial behavior has not collapsed. And even the communists are colonialists. That's why they lost their Soviet Union, because that form of colonialism collapsed. And the Chinese colonialism in Mongolia and Tibet and the Uyghur country, where the Muslims are, in Uyghur country, the Turkestan, they're desperately trying to hold on, but to do so, they're becoming inhumane, and therefore they are invalidating themselves. And they will collapse if they keep it up. But I'm hoping they will be smart enough, because they had not to do that. But who knows?
So something that I was realizing today, Bob, is that today is the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the Hiroshima bomb.
Yes.
And
His Holiness has a special statement on online.
I haven't seen that.
Look at it. It's just I saw it this morning.
And when I see Russia and the US at the moment, I don't see that we have learned too much in 75 years. I mean, we still have lunatics that can push a button and destroy us all in 15 minutes.
I know.
And I heard you.
Well, that won't happen. I can guarantee it.
How's that?
Well, because I'm a silly person, so I'm guaranteed. Because my teacher guaranteed to me, several of my teachers. And then I did have a dream one time, like a vision one time, about a form of the Bodhisattva of compassion called Hayagriva. Do you know who that is?
Yeah.
Hayagriva. And somehow I hitched a ride with Hayagriva in 1971, when Nixon and Brezhnev had a small conspiracy, because Brezhnev wanted to eradicate Mao, and he didn't want to have a second communist nuclear-powered nation. So he wanted to eradicate China before they could develop industrially, and Mao personally. And Nixon was just as happy to see that happen, because he liked Brezhnev. He just gave Brezhnev a very fancy hunting rifle. If you go back and look in the history, this is top secret. Nobody knows this. And I don't really know it either, but I was just there in a dream.
Wow.
Allen Ginsberg and everybody, Allen Ginsberg came to India. I was in India. And Allen Ginsberg came, and he'd just been escaped arrest. Nixon had arrested all kinds of protesters and so forth. Bangladesh war was taking place. China and Russia were fighting on the north of Manchuria, and so on. And anyway, Brezhnev and Nixon, Brezhnev tried to nuke China. He did. And Hayagriva, he had flaming hair, like fabulous flaming hair. Hayagriva did. Not just ordinary flames. The hair of that kind of Buddhist, Indian Tibetan Buddhist, fierce, not angry. I never say wrathful. Not a wrathful deity. There's no wrathful deities. They're just fierce.
Don't use that word, wrathful.
I never use that word, because they're not angry at anybody. They're fierce. They show the form of fierceness. Anyway, he took his hair, flaming hair, and he jammed all the electronics.
This in your dream?
Well, it's like a vision. He jammed the electronics. I see, seriously. And Brezhnev was going like this, pressing buttons. And I remember it looked like masturbation in my vision. I was laughing because it looked like he was trying to masturbate, because he kept pressing this button. And Nixon also they were on a red line, and he was like, well, what's going on? They could talk to each other electronically, but they couldn't press any buttons.
No way.
And the people were calling from the silos, and they were saying, well, commissar, or whatever, secretary, whatever they call him. They were saying, I don't speak Russian, but I could understand it in that dream. And they were saying, there's nothing wrong. Everything checks out, but we're not getting the signal. And they didn't know what it was. And they were going like this. And then they suddenly looked up simultaneously from the Kremlin and the White House. And the roof became transparent. And they saw this ferocious thing in the sky, like an angel. They would have seen it like a seraph, like an angel, like a flaming hair, just up there like, no, no, no. And they looked at that. No. And then it ended. Vision ended at some stage. And the ending of the vision was very funny, because the ending of the vision, for some reason, off on the corner from this spaceship I was in, or whatever it was, satellite, there was Zhou Enlai. I don't remember who he was. Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai. Oh, he was the famous Mao's famous foreign minister, and he was giggling, looking up at me, giggling, and well, not at me, at Hayek Riva. And somehow the Dalai Lama was also somehow there, sitting off. He wasn't involved in it directly, but he was sitting there too. So somehow, an angle of vision, I saw the two of them, and Zhou Enlai was giggling and wagging his finger at the Dalai Lama, because I guess he was associating what somehow he was aware was happening. And he was saying to Dalai Lama, ha, 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 you can't even destroy your enemies. He was gloating in English, like he was gloating at the Dalai Lama. Ha ha, you can't even destroy your enemies, he was saying. And I was so shocked by that. A, that he knew he was having some kind of version of this vision. And B, I was completely shocked by the whole thing. I couldn't even understand it. And I still don't. But, one time my old teacher, a Mongolian guy, he interrupted, he interrupted a conversation that a bunch of people were having about, nuclear war and everything will be destroyed. And in the 60s, I think. And he had a way, sometimes he would draw himself into a certain posture. And then he would say something that you could never forget. Now and then, not all the time. He was just very normal, playing chess and whatever. But sometimes he would do that. And he said, never. Don't you worry. There will be no such nuclear war here. No way. Never. He said that. And I remembered that.
So I think I will borrow your faith and Geshe Wangyal's.
But anyway, I'm sorry for digressing, because I'm so happy to be talking to Latin people, but through the very kind Paulina, because the real question is, so therefore what I'm saying is, and then Tibet and then later Mongolia, they became mainstream Buddhist cultures. But it wasn't Holy Roman Empire, because they didn't have armies. All the male potential warriors became monks.
Right.
So they did their warriorship, fighting ignorance, kind of. And now and then some lesser monks would actually have wrestling matches and kind of sports. They would beat each other up. There were some thuggish like monks. There were called doptos. The doptos, like martial artist monks. There were some like that. But they just would fight with each other a little bit. They didn't really go out and conquer any kingdoms or anybody. And they didn't really have real weapons. They would use heavy keys and bang each other with them. But so they weren't perfect. I'm not claiming everybody was enlightened there by any means. But the cultures became mainstream cultures, which means that the sort of Buddhist ethic of nonviolence, of sensible arrangements about medicine and food and wealth and whatever, were implemented.
Mm.
And there was no major poverties and no major famines and etc. Unfortunately, because of the nomadic aspect of the Mongolians and the semi-nomadic aspect of the Tibetans, they still ate meat. So they weren't fully, I don't say they were perfect Buddhists. So they would kill a yak or two or a sheep, but actually they didn't eat or kill small animals.
Mm.
They didn't fish, like one life is one bite,
Mm.
or one meal. They didn't do that. They didn't keep chickens and things, they didn't keep small animals because they were sorry about killing the yak,
Mm.
and the yaks were their wealth, for the nomad. But they did eat them though, now and then, and in a careful way. They preferred to milk them actually as much as they could, but occasionally some useless male they would eat it. And
So, Bob, I want to explore with you.
So what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
the reason that a lot of Buddhists act like, I'm not going to trouble myself with voting, I'm
Right.
not going to take charge here, I'm not going to worry about even the worst, it's just samsara, the worst government is never mind, some of us will still attain enlightenment, blah, blah, blah. That's all comes from being used to not being responsible, because you don't have authority, you're not the mainstream. You try to ameliorate, of course, you try to get the ruling people to behave nicely. It's not that you don't do that. You ask them come meditate and be nicer, but you don't really think you can make a program for the whole community. Whereas the Mongolians and the Tibetans did.
Right.
And this involves, and to make the community work on, and to make this on this planet, we have to demilitarize. And that's the Dalai Lama only is the world leader who teaches that. And that is, and others are, oh, well, I would teach it, but it's impossible. They'll never do it. No, you can't say that. It's not impossible. The example of India, Tibet, and Mongolia are there. There are other Buddhist countries and Christian countries where the religions, and Muslim countries where the religions were controlled by the sultans and by the conquering kings. Then they're only counterculturally some good guys trying to make it nice, some Sufis, some mystics, and usually they get killed actually by the nasty military rulers, male chauvinist military rulers, right? But the point is, if we, now on the planet, we're in a situation where we have to demilitarize. There can be no more huge military budget like the US has. We don't need that. We don't need it. They can't, those weapons are unusable. Putin can show a weird video of a nuclear weapon that drives up and down the subways and goes underground, and I don't know what all it's going to do, but that's just a video. That's a cartoon. He never would dare to do it because he'll be pulverized himself. He will. Even he's drunk, he won't do it. And because somewhere Hayagriva will pop up, and really Hayagriva is human beings' own sensitivity. It's not really an external thing.
Right, like any bodhisattva, actually.
Yeah, everyone has their own thing. And then, they say, well, how can I protest if I'm not angry? Well, it doesn't mean you can't be forceful. Actually, nonviolent that Gandhi did is forceful. They went and they got hit and their heads got cracked, to get the British out of there. So they use force. Nonviolence is a kind of force. It absorbs force. And eventually the inner Hayagriva of the police hitting the Gandhian protester, they stopped being willing to take orders from the British overlords to hit them. And the British officers they were in a big enough number of them to go out and hit everybody. So the British had to leave, you see. And nonviolence is very, very strong, actually. When people really get down to the point of we really have to do that, they will, and that will prevail. It will defeat militarism, actually. Just like women, if they really step up and beyond me too, and me on top, and they insist, then men will cave. Totally.
With glorious pussy hats.
That's right.
So, Bob, I think we're going for 5 more minutes because I know
Okay.
it's a lot for the translator and for one session. So I want to ask you about this concept that actually was in the title of the call for today, which is the cool revolution and cool
Oh,
heroism.
yeah.
And people
Well,
really,
mhm.
people who are listening, really want to get a sense of what can I do to contribute myself to a more peaceful and just
Yes.
world, to contribute to ecological restoration and all that, because people see these huge themes and don't know what to do. So what do you mean
Yes.
by a cool revolution and cool heroism in
Right.
these times, not in India, not in Tibet, but in the US, in
Well,
Argentina,
they
Chile?
did it. The point is, it's important that they succeeded in it in India and Tibet, even though the result was then buried under hot conquerors and hot revolutionaries. And by hot, I mean those fueled by hatred.
Mm,
Anger, in its bad definition, you can have a good anger, which is not hating, it's just forcefully resisting.
mm,
You could say that can be a good anger because it isn't gripping you internally with hatred. It's
mm,
just outrage, refusing to accept something, but not hating the people who are doing it, just considering them misled and misguided. So and not liking, being angry with what they're doing rather than at
mm,
them.
mm,
So you can define anger that way, but usually anger is defined as like hatred, same thing. So
mhm,
then that is when you are helpless yourself before your own addictive emotion of anger or hatred.
mm,
And then you don't competently resist. You don't resist effectively. In
mm,
fact, you bring down more counter oppression upon yourself. Is the whole science of nonviolent politics, you know. So what about this? Well, um, uh, the human being is great. And when you realize that you've been every other kind of animal in the past already, you've already been the bad bear, you've been the ferocious lion, you've been the crocodile that ate the zebra, you've been the zebra that was eaten by the crocodile, you've been every kind of bug. When you go infinity in the past and you realize now I'm this amazingly sensitive being that has also the ability to think and the great gift of language,
mm,
that to reshape my thinking and to be critically investigating how my mind works. And so I only have this platform
mm,
of the human embodiment and the human mind and the marvelous sensory instruments and the brain and so forth, and the whole brain, all the chakras, you know, the inner nervous system, the neurological nervous system, amazing human sensitivity. And I only have so many years left, and then I don't. And then, as long as I am not able to lucidly dream, or even be lucid when I'm awake, when I'm in a highly agitated emotional state, I lose my
mm,
lucidity.
mm,
Then my highest priority as a human being is to develop that lucidity by
mm,
understanding how my mind works. And if
mm,
I was a crocodile, I wouldn't have the ability to go
mm,
to a vipassana retreat or a
mm,
compassion retreat or a meditation
mm,
retreat and have a teacher and read and understand that myself. I would just be eating what was in front of
mm,
me. So, or being eaten by what was behind me.
mm.
So that's what I must do.
So the cool
And
revolution,
and the
according
cool
to you,
revolution,
would start
cool,
from your inner work, so that
yeah.
that it gets projected outside as a peaceful contribution. Is
Yes.
something
Well,
like
we
that?
always talk about Martin Luther King and
Mm,
Gandhi and et cetera, and Buddha and many
mm,
great Buddhist siddhas and leaders. We always talk about them. And one time I was asked this question when I first published In a Revolution book a
mm,
few decades ago. And I was a little stumped because, you know, I was,
mm,
of course, thinking of leaders.
mm,
And then an image came into my mind of a family, my birth family, even my own family,
mm,
when people lose their tempers.
mm,
And the people who usually lose them are the men. And they can be sons and brothers and fathers and even grandfathers. And they go out of control and they start saying hateful things to each other. And they start, you know, we can't live here. You have to leave, or I leave, or you can't throw me out, you know. And there's all this stuff, and people will come to blows. And as
mhm,
we know, people will kill each other actually in families widely in this world. And who is it when it has a better outcome and it doesn't lead to the ultimate violence, these kind of terrible things that go on? The women in the family. And they say, no, dear, don't say that. You don't mean that. No, you don't mean that about your dad. No, you don't mean that about your brother. No, no, no. No, and they try to get in the middle of it. And they usually get hit often. And they get pushed aside or thrown aside and hurt. And that's the cool heroes in the family. Every woman, all half of humanity, and even more than half in some places, unfortunately less than half in some bad places like China, like communist China, where they killed off too many women, because they couldn't make money. They thought of something, the women are the cool heroes. So we guys who are socialized, indoctrinated, conceptualized to be militaristic, we play football, we play American football, which is even more militarized, lacrosse, smashing with hockey, we do military type games, and we're brought up to lose our temper quickly. That's supposed to be good, be aggressive. And women are supposed to control their temper and be nice. They're supposed to let us get away with it as brother and sister and so forth. So they are the cool heroes to some degree by force in the bad societies, and to some degree by having been oppressed like this for thousands of years by all these patriarchal militarized societies, including Eastern ones, not just Western ones, Eastern ones too. But because of that, they have developed greater self-awareness, greater self-control. They are more naturally altruistic because they have the visceral experience of another squatter, a renter who pays no rent, taking up residence in their stomachs, in their wonderful wombs, taking up residence there for almost a year, and knocking, I want more strawberries, I want more chocolate, don't eat so much hot spice, don't go riding in the bumpy car so much, don't get angry, blah, 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 there's somebody kicking, and then the terrible effort to get it out of there. Really, they're the heroes. They're totally a bunch of heroes. And they're cool because they tend to release oxytocin of looking for alliances and connectivity and what to do in stressful situations rather than immediately blowing up and charging ahead like the male with the cortisol, the cortisol and the heart attack, the male.
Right.
So it's not that hopeless to us all to become cool heroes and study our Shantideva and listen to the Dalai Lama, the world leader of world leaders, and try to implement it in whatever small scale. Don't try to go beyond what we can do. Don't march out and try to push our way by force into the presidential palazzo if they're Bolsonaro's, a bunch of military coup d'etat people. They just kill you. But, on a small scale or whatever in the neighborhood with some minor bully, bit by bit, cultivate the ability to not freak out yourself. Don't hate yourself even when you do freak out, and be a cool hero in dealing with your own failures and flaws, being compassionate for yourself. And cultivate the ability of being cool hero. And this is our unique opportunity as human beings to do this. And we can do this as Theravada monk, or nun. We can do it as Christian monk or nun. We can do it as Muslim, Sufi, but also regular lay person, family within family. That's where all of it starts and stops. We can do it as anywhere. We can cultivate this thing. That is the major thing to understand is two things. Okay, we were concluding. I know, I'm sorry, Paulina. This is the last thing I will say. One, reality is totally good. The nirvana is the stronger reality than the samsara. The samsara is not a complete illusion, but it's similar to an illusion. But nirvana is the real thing, and ultimately nirvana is in the midst of the samsara, so we can find it everywhere, luckily. So the point is, the shifting from being scared and uncertain, maybe the ultimate reality is bad. Maybe God is a sadist if we believe in God, but maybe he's mean and will send us to hell. That's the problem with the monotheistic, omnipotent monotheism. God is love, has no problem. But when God is controlling everything, and then I'm still suffering, then there's a kind of fear that sets in. And that's a problem. And it's blaming too much on God. So it's a type of monotheism where God is love is fine. So I'm not saying you have to be Buddhist, anybody, but you have to feel that reality. You have to cultivate the feeling that the default, when the screen goes blank, is good. When you die, you'll be embraced by the angels, good angels. They'll help you, not bad ones. They'll push away the bad ones. They're stronger. The good guys are stronger because they're more realistic. The bad reality is less realistic. Okay, that's point one. And second point is the human being has achieved this evolutionary form, each one with their own understanding and effort, not just some sort of mechanical machine-like species and not under the control of anybody else. Each one as individual has achieved a very sensitive and self-reflective form of life and very interconnectable mammal, fun-loving form of life. Every single human has been a helpless baby for a decade or more, 2 decades, actually 5 decades sometimes, depending on the kindness of strangers. And every baby is a stranger at first, in fact. And so that's an amazing achievement that you have all achieved. And therefore, and the essence of it is you're very transformable. You can become extremely bad if you let yourself go in the hatred, greed, jealousy, arrogance, ignorant, delusory, demented direction. You can become very worse than the worst tiger. But if you go the opposite way, you can become incredibly happy, incredibly good. And this is your great opportunity. You are not hardwired. That's fake. Materialist biology tells you you're hardwired this and that way. That is fake. Every military instructor knows that a nice young man or woman who respects their grandmother and wouldn't hurt a hair on her head can be trained to kill grandmothers viciously and completely changed because the human is completely malleable.
Right.
Ultimately, there's that softness there, that the inner Hayagriva that resists becoming harsh and rigid and harmful because it makes you more unhappy when you harm others. And we all kind of instinctively know that as a human. But it can be really crusted over by all kinds of bad things if we let ourselves go. But we don't have to. We can have education. We can meet someone like a Dalai Lama online. We can meet Bishop Tutu online. Helder Camara, the great Brazilian liberation theologian, and Pope Francis. I love it. Francis is total bodhisattva. He doesn't have to be Buddhist. And I just hope that some nasty ones in his hometown there don't get after him because he's taking away their gold plates and he's making them eat on ordinary china and he's melting the gold to give it to the poor, which is what they should be doing.
Right.
And they want to do, everyone's good-heartedness wants that to happen. So this is not, Dalai Lama said in a recent movie about it, David Bohm, a quantum physicist who he loved, he said, in all of my teaching, and I hope to keep the same line, which he taught me. At first, I wasn't maybe like that in the very first years. But that is, he said, I have never taught the Buddha Dharma, to anybody with the ulterior motive of wishing to make them into a Buddhist. I want a Christian to be a better Christian. I want a Muslim to be a better Muslim. A Buddhist already, they should be a better Buddhist. A Jew to be a better Jew. whatever it is, a Baha'i, a better Baha'i, a Sikh, a better Sikh. I can't, a Taoist, a better Taoist, but a Confucianist, a better Confucianist. Whatever you think of, better. Be happy because of being a happier human being. I'm not out there for market share and for denominational missionarizing. This is a mistake on the modern world. Everyone has to quit it and have more trust in Jesus if you're a Christian, and more trust in Muhammad and in God and Al-Rahim and the compassionate God. If you're and Jews we're happier with the Jews. They don't try to convert you unless you marry one. Otherwise, they don't run out and try to make you into Jews. And that's good. From Dalai Lama loves that. He loves that about them, and he admires that about them, and he wants Tibetan Buddhists to be like that.
Fantastic.
And he's like that, and I want to be like that. So thank you, Paulina. You worked so hard, and Gonzalo. He descubierto el Gonzalo. Brito. Bonds. But Bonds is a bridge, no?
Exactly, yeah.
Ponte.
Means
And
bridge.
Brito is brillo. I don't know Brito. ¿Qué quiere decir Brito? It sounds like brillo.
I don't know actually, but my second last name, Pons, I'm trying to be a bridge here, and I'm happy to be a bridge between you and my Spanish-speaking community from Chile, Argentina, and my friends in Spain too. So I feel very, very grateful for your presence, your energy, which is wonderful. I hope you keep that energy for many decades to come, and that you learn Spanish so we can bring you down to the south.
I see. I have a friend in Chile, as you know, Alberto Viloldo.
Yeah.
And I like to go spend time more in Chile and Argentina. And Sebastian goes to Argentina all the time. His mother and sister are there. My dear Sebastian.
Fantastic.
So anyway, and my dear Gonzalo.
Very happy
to meet you.
Happy to meet you too.
Encantado.
Encontrarle
a todos.
If I can be a bridge to your energy to
no, not mine. It's everybody's energy.
Fantastic.
Everybody's energy. When I was a teenager, I just loved Rubén Darío and García Lorca and all of them. I didn't read enough. I need to read some more recent ones. I have to get back to it.
So I'm going to finish Paulina's translation so she can
voy a terminar con la traducción de Paulina.
Sí. Así podemos hablar en español.
Muchísimas gracias, Paulina. Thank
Un placer.
Thank you. My pleasure.